Daniel 7, we're going to get down through verse 18 tonight. And I mentioned this last week, but chapter 7 really starts kind of a new section, I guess you could say, the book of Daniel. It's definitely very easily split into the first 6 and the last 6 chapters. And I think you'll see what I mean by that as we go through over the next couple of chapters, and it's going to be the same all the way up through chapter 12. But Daniel chapter 7, verse 1, it says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. And then he wrote the dream, and he told the sum of the matters. So Daniel spoke, and he said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings, and I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given unto it. And behold, another beast, a second like unto a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth, and it devoured, and it brake in pieces, and it stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first ones plucked up by the root. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. And I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him, and thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And the judgment was set, and the books were opened. And I beheld them because of the voice of the great word for a season and time. And I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit, in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. And I came near to one of them that stood by, and I asked him the truth of all this, and so he told me, and made me know the interpretation of the things. And then these are the final 2 things we'll see tonight. These great beasts, which are 4 kings, which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom, and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. And so, as I said, chapter 7 here now marks a new division of the book of Daniel. And so, by and large, obviously not completely, but by and large, the first 6 chapters of Daniel, and we talked about this a little bit last week, are stories, true stories that actually happen, but stories that are kind of setting the idea for us that God is absolutely sovereign. And it's laying down this foundation of God's sovereignty. And the reason why we want to understand so strongly that God is sovereign is because the rest of the book, by and large, chapters 7 through 12, are going to deal mostly with prophecy. And so we're going to see a lot of prophetic things, but we can rest assured that all of this prophecy that we're going to see is going to come to pass because we've seen over and over and over and over again how God is sovereign. And not just sovereign generally, but sovereign specifically over individuals, and sovereign over kingdoms, and sovereign over kings. And so, as Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar, he sets up kings, he takes down kings. He sets up kingdoms, he takes down kingdoms. And so we've already seen that. We've seen Daniel now move from the Babylonian Empire to the Persian Empire. We've seen him look Belshazzar in the eye and says, tonight God's taken the kingdom away from you. Now, who did it? The Medes and the Persians did it, but it was God's sovereignty that made it happen. And so all of that is kind of foundational for our understanding that if God can do all that, we can rest assured that he's going to do all the things that we see in chapter 7 through 12. And so chapter 7 here, we begin this new prophetic portion. That's, again, not to say that there was no prophecy before. There absolutely was, particularly chapter 2. But we're going to be dealing with a lot of it moving forward. And so just as a little note, verse 1, we talked about this in chapter 5, but verse 1 shows us that we're kind of moving backwards chronologically as this vision is given to him in the first year of Belshazzar. Well, chapter 5 is, the fall of Babylon and the end of Belshazzar's reign. And so chapter 7 is actually moving us chronologically prior to chapter 5. But it's not, the chronology of it all is really not necessary for its understanding. And so the first vision here in chapter 7 is given to Daniel in the form of a dream. And so God can give visions in various ways. In this one instance, he gives it to Daniel in the form of a dream. And it concerns the history of the kingdoms of men culminating into the final eschatological and eternal kingdom of Christ. And so he begins by describing this dream, and it's strange, to be sure. And so he sees, the first thing he sees is the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. Now, the great sea is almost always in Scripture is going to be a reference to the Mediterranean Sea. However, the location and the specificity of the sea is much less important than what the sea means. And so as Daniel's dreaming, I think it's likely he is seeing the Mediterranean. But what it means is something different. And so he sees this sea, and he sees the winds blowing upon it. And so the sea prophetically in Scripture, the sea typically uses or is used as a reference to humanity and even more specifically, typically Gentile nations. But nevertheless, generally speaking, humanity. We see an instance of this. This is not the only one in Revelation, but just to give you one. In Revelation 17:15, and he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the horse sitteth are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. They're the waters, they were the sea. And so, again, this is consistent to see a sea representing peoples, and particularly Gentile peoples. And so the winds are stirring up the sea, likely referencing turmoil. It's not smooth sailing. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be battles. There's going to be, this isn't a smooth transition of power with regards to the overall vision that Daniel's going to see. And so out of the turbulent sea then come up these four great beasts. And Daniel uses the number 4 a lot. But here again, we see 4 great beasts. And he describes these as diverse, and then he kind of zeroes in on the 4th one and says not only are they all diverse, but the 4th is even more diverse. It's even more diverse than the other 3. And so we're going to talk more about what these are later on, but just to describe the actual dream that Daniel has. And so he says the first one is like a lion. It's not a lion, it's like a lion. And so the first is like a lion, and this lion-like beast has the wings of an eagle. However, something, and it doesn't tell us what, but something plucks off the feathers of the wings, takes the lion up and sets it up on 2 feet as if he were a man, and gives the lion-like figure a man's heart. And then the second beast he sees is like a bear. And so the bear is raised up on one side. It is not totally standing up. It's raised up on one side, and he has 3 ribs in his mouth. And then as you can assume, chomping down on those ribs, the bear is told, arise, devour much flesh. Okay, and then the third beast arises, and the third beast is like a leopard. And the leopard had 4 wings. And so the leopard, already a fast animal, has 4 wings on it, and also 4 heads. And then we read their dominion was given to the leopard. And then the 4th one is obviously very, very different. It's not even described as anything like an animal. It's just ferocious. It's terrible. It's dominating. It's described as dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. Again, no animal descriptors are given to the 4th kingdom. It's just something that's just awful. And so we don't know exactly what Daniel sees. He never really gives us a physical description of it like he does the other 3. It's just dreadful and terrible, strong. We know that it has iron teeth. Exactly what the teeth look like or what those teeth were connected to, we don't know. But it had iron teeth, and it had legs that would trample upon anything left of the former beasts. And so furthermore, this particular beast has 10 horns. And then he tells of another, an 11th horn, a little horn, that arises. And then as the 11th horn comes up, it plucks up by the roots 3 of the former of the 10 horns. And then that 11th horn, the little horn, is described as having eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great things. Again, we're not given a full, really description of the physical, what the fourth beast looks like physically, other than a few. We know it has teeth, we know it has legs, we know it has horns. That's about as far as we get with it. But he sees these 4 beasts, and then the vision kind of switches. And here our assumption is that Daniel is taken up into heaven. That's kind of the assumption then. And so you see in verse 9, he says, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit. And so he sees these thrones being positioned, and he sees this Ancient of Days, as he describes him, sitting upon the throne. And he says the Ancient of Days he's dressed in white. He's in all white. He has hair of wool. He's sitting on a fiery throne, and this fiery throne has wheels. And so, again, all of this has symbolic meaning. More than likely, the wheels on the throne indicate that the throne is going everywhere. And if your throne goes everywhere, your throne depicts what? It depicts your authority. And if your throne can go anywhere because it has wheels on it, it depicts that you have authority everywhere you go, right? And so this Ancient of Days is globally authoritative, is kind of how you might describe it. And so this Ancient of Days sitting upon the throne, and then Daniel sees him surrounded by thousands and thousands of beings. We can't really say, again, just from the dream perspective, he doesn't describe it. He just says, there's, in the middle of verse 10, he says, but that before him there were thousands ministered unto him, 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And so we don't get physical descriptions of them either, but these beings are surrounding the Ancient of Days. And it says, and the judgment was set and the books were opened. And so obviously, we don't even have to guess on this. The Ancient of Days here is sitting in judgment. And the assumption is, since he has authority over everything, that he's judging everything. Right? And that's the assumption here. And so it seems rather clear, and I don't want to go so far as to say that this is definitive, but it would be hard-pressed to get any other interpretation out of this than this is anything other than God the Father. And so the Ancient of Days is God the Father, and God the Father is sitting upon this throne. And what is interesting about this is that a lot of the imagery and things that he uses to describe God the Father are very, very similar to descriptors given of Jesus in the book of Revelation. And it just should make sense from a Trinitarian perspective that as you describe one, you would describe the other. But this is very, I would say, clearly representing or showing us God the Father, because there's a Son of Man coming, right? There's a Son of Man that is distinct from the Ancient of Days. And so Daniel then sees the judgment of the 4th beast. Now the assumption then is that the other 3 beasts have already had their time. And so Daniel is now seeing the judgment of the 4th beast. And this particular judgment was total and it was complete. And that'll make sense why I say that in a second. And so it says, the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Now, we're not going to really look at the little horn tonight. The little horn we're going to discuss next week. There's too much to get through tonight. But you could just very easily say, go read Revelation 19, and you're going to see what this judgment is talking about. But nevertheless, the beast was slain, body destroyed, given to the burning flame. And then it specifically tells us, and I found this interesting, that the other beasts had their dominion taken away. They were taken over. They had their dominion taken away. But their influence continued. You see that there at the end of verse 12. It says, concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away. It says, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. They still continued to have influence. Now, again, we're going to have to look ahead just a little bit here. As we'll see in a minute, these beasts represent kingdoms. And so the kingdoms, the first 3 kingdoms, were taken over and yet still had influence. Well, this just makes sense. Historically, this happened. The Babylonians were destroyed by the Medes and the Persians, but that doesn't mean that all Babylonian culture and all thought of Babylon is just gone overnight, and now it's a new, distinctly different kingdom in the Medes and the Persians. No, there would have been a lot of carryover with thought and culture, and not to mention territory. And the same thing would have happened when the Greeks defeated the Persians, and the same thing happened when the Romans defeated the Greeks. Obviously, if you've studied any kind of Roman history, you know that the Greeks had tremendous influence over Roman society. And so their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged. They still had influence. They still had that kind of a vestige of Greece was hanging around in the Roman Empire. And so but that's not the case with the fourth. When the fourth beast is judged, it's complete. There's nothing left. And that's because the fourth beast, again, the fourth kingdom, when that fourth beast is finally judged, it's giving way to God's kingdom. And there's no vestige of man's kingdom left over when it comes to God's kingdom. It is totally new and unique, and it will all belong to him. And so we will rule along with Christ. The saints will rule. We'll see that at the end, along with Christ. But as far as the dominion and the culture and the influence of man's kingdom, that will be totally done away with. It will be completely God's kingdom. And so Daniel then, he sees the Ancient of the Days judging the fourth beast, and then he sees one like the Son of Man come with the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient of Days, he being the Son of Man. And it says, and they brought him near before him, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. And so unlike the other four, right, this one is unending. This one is unconquerable. This one never has its dominion taken away. And so thus the Ancient of Days, which as we said is clearly God the Father, gives the authority of the final kingdom to the Son of Man, which is God the Son. And so unlike the kingdoms of the beast, this particular kingdom shall never end. And this is a point Daniel makes a lot, not just here. He has made it previously, that the kingdom of God, that one will never, never end. And so we see here that Daniel, verse 15, it's interesting because this is happening still in the vision. And so Daniel said, I was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. And so Daniel is seeing all this, and there's a little bit of an interesting dichotomy, and I don't think there's really anything to make of this, but Daniel, up to this point, has always been the interpreter. And now Daniel needs an interpretation. And so again, I don't know what to make of that. Probably nothing, but it just seems interesting that all of a sudden Daniel now has to go to somebody to say, hey, please interpret this for me. And so Daniel goes to someone. Verse 16, he says, I came near unto one of them that stood by. That's all the description we get. One of them. And so who is the them? Well, we're not told, but I think it's a safe assumption to say that this is an angel. I don't think this is Jesus. I don't think this is God the Father. I think this is, again, safely, I think we can assume that this is an angel. And so, not John, but Daniel comes to, I believe an angel, and he asks him, he says, what is the truth of all this? What does this mean? And so he says, he told me, and you made me know the interpretation of the things. And so he gives a very basic interpretation. He doesn't really go into a lot of detail until Daniel asks about the little horn, which again, we'll have to look at that next week. But the first thing, he gives them two very basic interpretations. So the first thing he says, these great beasts which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth. And again, out of, to go back to what he said earlier, in particular out of the sea. These are Gentile nations. And so the first beast is Babylon, and you could say specifically Nebuchadnezzar. Any historian will tell you that the glory of Babylon greatly faded and dimmed when Nebuchadnezzar died. Nebuchadnezzar, for all practical purposes, was the Babylonian Empire. It did exist past him, not by a whole lot. It did exist past him, but in particular, Nebuchadnezzar represented the greatness of Babylon. And so, again, he does tell him, and I'll just point this out. He does say, verse 17, these great beasts which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth. However, it is very, very common to associate a king with a kingdom. In other words, I do think we can pinpoint a particular king for the first one, but that's not necessarily the case with all four. But we don't have to do that, because typically a king is kind of synonymous with his kingdom. Okay, and so 4 kingdoms. So the first is Babylon. Now Babylon was known, interestingly enough, to depict winged lions. They have found in excavations and things walls and gates and things in ancient Babylon with winged lions on them. This was something that was known to them, and so this. There's no doubt that that's what it's referring to. There would have been no question to those whom Daniel was writing what this was in reference to. So this is Babylon. And so furthermore, most people, and I would agree, most people see, and so the lion has his wings, and then the wings are plucked off. And then something, it doesn't tell us what, but something takes the lion, sets it up on 2 feet. And so most people, and again, I would agree, see this as the humbling of Nebuchadnezzar. And so Nebuchadnezzar was this great winged lion. And the lions, you know, they're the kings of nature, right? They're the most ferocious and everything. And you slap some wings on that thing, and now you have a quick, ferocious animal. And so that was kind of Babylon. They rose up quickly, didn't last for very long, but they were strong while they lasted. And then eventually, in particular with Nebuchadnezzar, the wings, at least for a period of a few years, those wings were plucked. And Nebuchadnezzar's out there eating grass with the ox in the field. But then eventually what happened? He was restored. And so eventually, after the wings were plucked, he set back up on his feet, and it says, given the heart of a man. And in ancient understanding, what we have to understand is when it says it gave him a heart, that would be the equivalent to us today saying somebody put a mind or brain into him. And so to them, the heart would have been the seat of intellectual thought. To us, we would say, you know, I thought of this with my mind. They would say that came from the heart. And then the things that we typically say emanate from the heart, you know, emotion, love, those kinds of things. Interestingly enough, they would say came from the bowels. And so that's kind of how the ancients saw it. And so bowels would be our heart. Heart would be our brain. And so this, I think, very clearly depicts Nebuchadnezzar's fall and then restoration. And again, who would have been the one to set him up? Even though Daniel doesn't tell us, it was God. God did that. And so God was humbling him. He plucked the wings, but God also put him back on his feet and gave him a heart. And so the first one is very clearly Babylon. And then I'm not going to take the time to talk about the debates as far as who the 4 kingdoms are. We talked about those back in chapter 2. The 4 kingdoms in chapter 7 are the same 4 kingdoms of chapter 2. There's really no difference here. So I'm not going to take the time to get into all that. So the second beast is the Medes and the Persians. And I don't want to, like I said, we won't take time to get into all the differences of opinion there. And so the ferocious bear then, what is interesting is that Daniel described the bear as being raised on one side. You know, whether or not he's had one leg and arm in the air, or whether he was just on the ground with one side raised up, we don't know. In some way, he had one side raised up. Now, it's still a bear. It's still strong. Outside of a lion, particularly in this part of the world, there was not a more feared, ferocious animal than the bear. And so the bear being raised on one side does kind of seem to suggest that there was more dominance, more dominion on one side of the bear. And again, this completely fits in with the Medo-Persian Empire, because whereas it starts with kind of this equal coalition between the Medes and the Persians, eventually the Persians took over as the supreme entity. And whereas it was once Medo-Persia, now it's just Persia. And so the Medes kind of lost all influence. They were still part of the bear. What took over Babylon was a conglomeration of the Medes and the Persians. But eventually the Persians kind of reigned supreme, and the Medes were kind of lost out. And so the 3 ribs there, the bear has 3 ribs in his mouth. Now again, this is speculation because we're not told exactly. But just looking back historically, most people seem to, and I have no reason not to believe this, that's how I'll say it. Most people think that the 3 ribs that the bear had in his mouth were representative of 3 major nations that the Medes and the Persians conquered. Okay, and so the 3 major nations would have been, first of all, Babylon, and then Egypt, and then Lydia. And so this is, again, a historically accurate and historically known fact that the Medes and the Persians conquered those three major, they weren't the only ones, but those were the three major ones that they conquered. And so most people think that that's probably what the three ribs represented. And then he's told, devour more flesh. And that particular kingdom reigned for another 200 years. And so again, this is all fits historically. And we should not be surprised that it does, because this is all coming from the God who knows the end from the beginning, the same sovereign God of the first 6 chapters. And then the third beast, the leopard, this would represent Greece. And so the leopard, already a very fast animal, this particular leopard, or beast like a leopard, this particular one it has 4 wings. And so an animal that's already fast, and then you put 4 wings on it, we're talking about incredible swiftness, incredible speed. And it's impossible to do a study of ancient Greece and not have somebody talk about the speed with which the Greeks conquered the known world at the time, all under Alexander the Great. And so you study Alexander the Great, and you'll find that he conquered most of the world at that particular time before he was 30 years old. And so it happened with tremendous speed, unprecedented speed. And then interestingly enough, this particular leopard has 4 heads. Well, Alexander the Great conquered the world, and then just a couple of years later, he dies. He dies, I think, 33, if I'm not mistaken. And so he dies very young. But after the death of Alexander the Great, they split Greece into 4 divisions. It's still Greece, but they divide it, instead of all under one, they divide it up into 4. And those 4 divisions are given to Alexander's 4 generals. And so again, incredible pinpoint accuracy, written hundreds of years before these events take place. And then the last beast, obviously we're talking about Rome here. Now, this one's completely different, as we talked about earlier. It's not even described as animal-like. It's just terrible. It's awful. It's ferocious. It's got iron teeth. It's got legs that trample. And so obviously these other 3, they had their time in the sun, and they reigned, and they were powerful, but it doesn't even begin to compare to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was a different beast altogether, lasting for hundreds of years, and so before the West eventually falls. And so the Roman Empire is completely different. To quote Herbert Leupold, he said, Rome had no interest in raising the conquered nations to any high level of development. All her designs were imperial. Let the nations be crushed and stamped underfoot. And imperialism, that, if you defined Rome by one word, that would probably be the best word for it, imperialist. And so all that they did was for the power and the glory of Rome. Now, again, I won't spend a lot of time here because we're going to talk about this next week. As far as identifying the 11th horn or the other 10 horns, I'll just quickly say this. The 10 horns of the beast, I believe, are no different than the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the idol, the image in Nebuchadnezzar's dream back in chapter 2. So I'll say the same thing here that I said then. I think the 10 horns are going to are representing a 10-fold division of a revived Roman Empire that will take place in the tribulation time. And you see this in Revelation 13, you see this in Revelation 17, you see this 10-fold division. And then the 11th horn, again, talk about this more next week, but the 11th horn would be the Antichrist. And so we'll see this. That's all I'll say about it right now, because we'll talk about it in more detail. But then the angel, that was the first general thing. And then the angel says, but, verse 18, but the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. And so again, there's these 4 beasts, and they're terrible, and they're ferocious, and they're strong, and they're powerful, and they have dominion, and they're quick, and they take over, and they do so ruthlessly, and they have their time. But the point is here, and the point of Daniel really is that because God is sovereign, all of these empires can have their time, again, their time in the sun, and I will say this, they only have the time given to them by God. The only reason they had a kingdom is because God gave it to them. But they will have their time, their sovereignly appointed time, But eventually the kingdoms of man are going to be destroyed. The kingdoms of man will give way to the kingdom of Christ, and that kingdom will never end. And so speaking of the new heaven and the new earth and the eternal kingdom, in Revelation 22 it says, "And there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun." It says, "For the Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever." And that, friends, is our hope. And that's one of the reasons Daniel was writing. I mean, he writes to a group that is in captivity and for many decades have been pulled away from the land that God gave them. And so Daniel is writing and would inspire hope in this people that here we are in captivity, now under a second empire that it's not even the ones who captured us. Right? Now we're under the Persians. And yet, in spite of all this, this was all planned by God. And in spite of all this, it does not in any way impede upon God's plans. God's promises are still going to be fulfilled. God still is going to have a kingdom, and we are going to reign with him in that kingdom. And so what a wonderful promise that Daniel points out, and again, a tremendous comfort, not only to us today, because we know this promise extends to us as far as reigning with him in the kingdom, but the promise would have been such a comfort to those in this captivity during the time in which Daniel was writing. So a very, very important a prophecy with regards to kind of human affairs and human history, but we'll see some more, well, a lot more prophetic things as we move forward and finish up